Darius Bell, the CEO of Innovis, was no stranger to challenges. As a black entrepreneur who had spent decades building his company from the ground up, he had encountered skepticism and barriers at every turn. When an email arrived inviting him to appear on The Morning Exchange, one of the most watched talk shows in the country, he was immediately cautious. The segment was titled, "The Black Tech Boom, Talent or Special Treatment," an angle that made his stomach tight. He had seen this play before. Mainstream media briefly highlighting black business leaders, only to frame their success as something that required justification rather than recognition. His assistant Tasha sensed his hesitation. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "You know how these shows work. They love a success story, but they love tearing one down even more." Darius leaned back in his chair, considering her words. Deep down, he already knew the game. If this was a setup, they were playing chess with the wrong man. "I'll handle it," he assured her. "Besides, it's national exposure. Let's see what they have to say." On the morning of the interview, Darius arrived at the KXNT studios in Los Angeles. The atmosphere in the green room was cold and clinical. A producer barely acknowledged him while briefing him quickly. The indifference wasn't lost on him. This wasn't about celebrating his success. It was about controlling the narrative. As he sat in the makeup chair, his eyes flicked to the studio monitor displaying the segment lineup. A discussion on celebrity scandals, followed by a cooking demo. Then his segment, framed as a debate on whether black entrepreneurs truly earned their success. His jaw tightened. He was ready. When he stepped onto the set, he was met by Madeline Royce, the show's lead anchor. A seasoned journalist with a reputation for tough interviews, she greeted him with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The first few minutes followed a predictable pattern. Praise for his company's recent $200 million government contract, acknowledging his rise from humble beginnings. But then, the real purpose of the interview revealed itself. Some industry experts say that Innovis benefited from diversity incentives, she probed, that maybe this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota. Darius saw through it instantly. He had spent years perfecting his craft, outperforming competitors, yet here he was, being asked to prove he deserved his success. He took a measured breath and responded, "Funny how when a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when the same legacy firms land these deals for generations, nobody questions it." The air in the studio shifted. Off-camera producers exchanged glances. This wasn't the direction they expected. Madeline wasn't done, but neither was Darius. She had come prepared to dismantle him, but he had come prepared to change the conversation. Darius Bell knew the game. When he received an invitation to appear on The Morning Exchange, one of the most watched talk shows in the country, he wasn't naive about what was coming. The segment, titled "The Black Tech Boom, Talent or Special Treatment," made the agenda clear. It wasn't about celebrating his success, but about questioning its legitimacy. Darius, the CEO of Innovis, had just secured a $200 million government contract, outbidding major players in the industry. He knew the work that had gone into achieving that milestone. Yet, instead of recognizing his company's innovation, the media wanted to discuss whether he had earned it or simply benefited from diversity initiatives. His assistant, Tasha, saw the trap before he even accepted the invitation. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "You know how these shows work. They build you up just to tear you down." Darius understood her concern, but had made up his mind. "I'll handle it," he replied. "Besides, it's national exposure. Let's see what they have to say." The morning of the interview, the atmosphere in KXNT studios was sterile and detached. A producer greeted him with minimal engagement, handing him instructions like he was just another guest on a routine segment. The lack of warmth wasn't lost on him. He wasn't there as a respected entrepreneur, but as a subject to be examined. While sitting in the makeup chair, he glanced at the screen displaying the show's lineup. The topics before his segment were light: celebrity scandals, a cooking demo, and then suddenly, his story framed as a debate rather than an achievement. His jaw clenched. He knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any less infuriating. When he took his seat across from Madeline Royce, the show's lead anchor, she greeted him with a rehearsed smile. "Darius Bell," she began smoothly, "CEO of Innovis, a true American success story." Darius nodded, keeping his composure. He recognized the strategy. Build him up first, create an illusion of respect before tearing him down. Your company recently secured a $200 million defense contract, Madeline continued. That's impressive. Darius answered with a measured response. It was a long process, but we put in the work. Our encryption technology outperformed the competition. Simple as that. Madeline crossed her legs, flipping through her cue cards. Some industry experts, she said, pausing for effect, believe that Innovis had an edge due to federal diversity incentives, that agencies are looking to diversify their vendors, that perhaps this wasn't just about being the best. There it was, the real purpose of the interview. Darius let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. It's funny, he said. When a black entrepreneur wins, people ask what program helped him. But when a company that's been run by the same families for generations lands the same deal, nobody questions it. The air in the studio changed. Off-camera, producers exchanged glances. This wasn't the narrative they had expected. Madeline wasn't finished, but neither was Darius. She had come to undermine him, but he had come to set the record straight. The moment Darius Bell stepped onto the set of the Morning Exchange, he knew what was coming. The carefully rehearsed smiles, the strategically placed camera angles, and the calculated script, all of it designed to control the narrative. But what they hadn't accounted for was the fact that Darius wasn't there to be dismantled, he was there to change the conversation. Across from him sat Madeline Royce, the show's lead anchor, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for asking hard-hitting, often loaded questions. She was ready to challenge him in ways few would dare challenge a white CEO. The initial pleasantries were predictable, praising his company's $200 million defense contract, acknowledging his rise from a humble background. But Darius knew this was merely a setup. The real battle was about to begin. Some industry experts say that Innovis may have had an edge due to federal diversity incentives, Madeline said, her tone smooth but pointed. That perhaps this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota. Darius let the silence stretch for a moment. He had been asked this before, framed as if his success had an asterisk next to it. But this time, he was going to answer on his terms. I've heard that argument before, he replied, his voice measured but firm. Funny how, when a black entrepreneur wins, it's called special treatment, but when a legacy firm, run by the same families for generations, lands the same deals, no one questions it. The energy in the studio shifted. The producers exchanged subtle glances. This wasn't the response they had expected. Madeline, however, was just getting started. So, you're saying race played no role at all in your success? She countered. Darius chuckled, shaking his head slightly. Let me ask you something, he said, turning the tables. When SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos secured government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? For the first time, Madeline hesitated, a subtle shift in her posture. The cameras captured every second. Still, she pressed forward, but surely these diversity programs help, don't they? They help level the playing field, Darius admitted. But what people forget is that the playing field was never leveled to begin with. The tension in the studio was palpable now. The control room was silent. Even the off-camera producers had stopped moving. But Madeline had one last card to play. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated, she asked, her voice carrying the weight of centuries-old narratives that dismiss systemic inequality? After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. Darius exhaled slowly, then leaned forward, his voice calm but deliberate. You know, it's funny, he said. People love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. But tell me this, if one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see, the fire wasn't that bad? A silence heavier than any scripted question filled the room. The moment was no longer just an interview. It was a reckoning. Darius Bell had always known that success came at a cost. But on that morning, as he sat under the bright lights of the Morning Exchange, Madeline Royce $200 million defense contract. But Darius, the setup was obvious. Build him up first, make it seem like they respected his achievements, then tear him down. Your company recently landed a $200 million government contract, beating out some of the biggest names in tech, Madeline began, her tone polished but laced with something unspoken. That's impressive. Darius gave a measured nod. It was a long process, but we put in the work. Our encryption technology outperformed the competition, simple as that. Madeline crossed her legs, flipping through her cue cards. Some industry experts believe that Innovis had an edge due to federal diversity incentives, she said. That agencies are looking to diversify their vendors, that perhaps this wasn't just about being the best. There it was, the real reason for this interview. Darius exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. It's funny, he said, his voice calm but firm. When a black entrepreneur wins, people ask what programs helped him. But when a company that's been run by the same families for generations lands the same deal, nobody questions it. The energy in the studio shifted. The producers exchanged glances. This wasn't the narrative they had expected. Madeline, however, wasn't done. So, you're saying race played no role at all in your success? Darius chuckled, shaking his head slightly. Let me ask you something, he said, turning the tables. When SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos secured government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? For the first time, Madeline hesitated. A flicker of something in her expression. Uncertainty? Annoyance? She wasn't expecting him to push back this hard. Still, she pressed forward. But surely, these diversity programs help, don't they? They help level the playing field, Darius admitted. But what people forget is that the playing field was never level to begin with. Silence. Even the off-camera producers had stopped moving. But Madeline had one last card to play. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated, she asked, her voice carrying the weight of centuries-old narratives that dismiss systemic inequality. After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. Darius exhaled through his nose, then leaned forward. His voice was quiet but heavy with truth. You know what's funny, he said. People love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. But, tell me this, if one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see? The fire wasn't that bad. The studio froze. Madeline opened her mouth but hesitated. There was no comeback for that. Darius wasn't done. The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken, he continued. It just means I had to fight twice as hard to get through it. The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud. The cameras captured every second of Madeline's discomfort. The producers didn't cut to commercial, they didn't intervene. Because this was raw, real, unstoppable. When the interview finally ended, the fallout was immediate. The clip went viral within hours. Twitter exploded with reactions, some praising him for speaking truth, others accusing him of playing the race card. News outlets scrambled to cover the controversy. By the next morning, Darius Bell's name was everywhere. And he wasn't backing down. Darius Bell had walked into the interview on the Morning Exchange knowing exactly what to expect. What he hadn't anticipated was just how big the fallout would be. Within hours of his heated exchange with Madeline Royce, clips of the interview flooded social media. The internet had taken hold of the moment and turned it into a national conversation. Some praised him. Darius Bell just exposed media bias on live TV. This was powerful. Truth hurts. The way he looked into the camera and called out America, chills. Others dismissed him. Here we go again. Another successful guy pretending to be oppressed. Cry me a river. Stop the victim mindset. Hard work speaks louder than race. By noon, cable news picked up the story. Each network had its own angle. Fox News, is Darius Bell the new face of corporate entitlement? CNN, Darius Bell's viral moment, a reckoning for America's meritocracy. Business Insider, what Darius Bell's interview reveals about race and success in America. The media did what it always did, turned his moment into a battleground. Madeleine Royce, now in damage control mode, addressed the controversy on her show the next morning. "I respect Mr. Bell and his accomplishments," she said, her tone carefully rehearsed. "But I stand by my questions. My job as a journalist is to ask what the audience is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were." Translation: she wasn't backing down. Darius watched the segment from his office, shaking his head. His assistant Tasha sat across from him, scrolling through emails. "You know," she said, "we just got a flood of new investor inquiries. People want to work with us." Darius smirked. "Let me guess. The same people who ignored us last year?" Tasha shrugged. "Guess being controversial is good for business." But it wasn't all positive. Some clients pulled out, a major corporate partner suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitment, and then the threats started. Emails, phone calls, even an unmarked package left outside Innovis's headquarters. Inside, just a single sheet of paper with one word in bold: "Enough." Tasha frowned as she read the message. "You need security." Darius let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. He knew this would come. Because any time a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically, this is the cost. But backing down was never an option. The next morning, the chaos continued. News coverage intensified, debates raged online. Some demanded Darius apologize, while others called him a hero. He hadn't just spoken, he had challenged a system that wasn't ready to be challenged. Then Tasha walked in with an offer. "A network wants you to do a televised special, a one-on-one deep dive about race, business, and the system." Darius exhaled. "So now they want to listen?" Tasha smirked. "Seems like it." She hesitated. "What do you want to do?" Darius leaned back, thinking. He could walk away, let the noise die down, get back to business. Or he could use this moment, not for clout, not for attention, but to say the things nobody wanted to hear. He picked up the folder, flipping through the proposal. Then he set it down and looked at Tasha. "Tell them I'll do it." Her eyes widened slightly. "You sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, but on my terms." Because if the system was going to put him under a spotlight, he was damn sure going to control the narrative. Darius Bell knew the interview would stir controversy, but he hadn't expected it to explode at this scale. Within hours of his debate with Madeleine Royce on the Morning Exchange, the internet was on fire. Clips of him challenging media bias and calling out systemic inequalities flooded social media. People weren't just discussing the interview. They were arguing over what it meant. Some saw him as a truth-teller, unafraid to expose uncomfortable realities. Darius Bell just shattered the myth of a fair playing field. The way he called out hypocrisy on live TV? Legendary. Others saw him as divisive. So tired of people playing the race card. If you work hard, you succeed. Why is that so hard to understand? By noon, news outlets picked up the story. MSNBC, Darius Bell speaks out, a hard conversation about race and business. Fox News, Darius Bell, a hero or just another complainer? Forbes, diversity in business, the debate Darius Bell just ignited. His name was everywhere. Madeleine Royce, realizing how much attention the interview had generated, defended her approach the next morning. "My job is to ask tough questions," she said, "and if people are uncomfortable with the discussion, then maybe it's a discussion we needed to have." She wasn't apologizing. Darius, watching from his office, shook his head. He had expected this. His assistant Tasha sat across from him, scrolling through her phone. "You're trending in every major market. Investors are suddenly interested in Innovis." Darius exhaled. "The same ones who ignored us last year?" Tasha smirked. "Funny how that works." But not all reactions were positive. Some clients withdrew their contracts, a major partner put their deal on hold, and then came the threats: anonymous emails, angry phone calls, even a package left outside Innovis headquarters. Inside, a torn piece of his interview transcript, with the words, "Know your place," scrawled across it. Tasha's face tightened as she read it. "This isn't just backlash, Darius. It's a warning." Darius let out a slow breath. He had seen this before. Anytime a black man spoke too boldly, too unapologetically, there was a price to pay. But he wasn't about to be silenced. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. An offer. A major network wants to give you a full hour, a special on race, business, and the system. Darius leaned back in his chair. So, now they want to hear me out? Tasha folded her arms. Seems like it. Question is, do you want to do it? Darius glanced out the window, watching the city move below him. He could let the storm pass. He could go back to business. Or he could push the conversation further. He turned to Tasha. Tell him I'll do it. Because this fight was bigger than him now. Darius Bell had spent his entire career proving himself. As the CEO of Innovis, he had built his company from the ground up, securing a $200 million defense contract, outperforming some of the biggest names in the industry. But despite his achievements, the world still questioned him. And on that fateful morning, during his interview on the Morning Exchange, he was forced to defend not just his success, but his very right to exist in the space he had earned. Sitting across from Madeleine Royce, lower his guard, and then be hit with the real questions. Some industry experts suggest that Innovis may have had an edge due to federal diversity incentives, Madeleine said smoothly, that perhaps this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota. There it was. Darius had expected this, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. He let a small pause settle before answering. It's interesting how success looks different depending on who achieves it, he said. When a black entrepreneur wins, people ask what programs helped him. But when the same legacy companies, run by the same families for generations, land those contracts, nobody questions them. The studio shifted. A few off-camera producers exchanged glances. This wasn't the answer they had expected. But Madeleine wasn't done. So you're saying race played no role at all in your success? Darius exhaled, shaking his head. Let me ask you something. When Elon Musk won NASA contracts, was it because of a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos landed government deals for Blue Origin, did anyone ask if it was because of his background? Or do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me? Madeleine hesitated, but she recovered quickly. Some would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before, that programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives exist specifically to open doors that weren't open decades ago. Darius leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. You know what's funny? When a black business owner succeeds, people always ask what programs helped us. But nobody asks which old money banks funded a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford or which golf buddy invested in their company. The air in the studio thickened. But Madeleine had one last card to play. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated? She asked. After all, your success proves that the system isn't as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some claim. Darius chuckled. People love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. But if one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see, the fire wasn't that bad? Silence. Madeleine opened her mouth but had nothing to say. Because Darius had already said everything that needed to be heard. In life, we are often judged not by our character or hard work, but by perceptions shaped by others. The stories of Darius Bell, Renee Dawson, and Terrence remind us that standing firm in our truth is one of the greatest acts of courage. They faced unfair treatment, prejudice, and even danger, yet they did not allow the system to define them. Instead, they used intelligence, dignity, and persistence to challenge injustice. For older generations, these lessons resonate deeply. We have seen how society often favors certain groups while making others struggle for basic recognition. But change happens when we refuse to be silent. It takes people like Darius, those willing to speak up despite backlash, to force the world to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. As we reflect on these stories, let us remember, success is not just about individual effort, but also about dismantling barriers for those who come after us. Whether in business, community, or daily interactions, we must support fairness and equality, because when one person fights for justice, they pave the way for generations to come.